Hello and welcome to Crofting Matters, the farm advisory series where we discuss items that matter in crofting. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Hogg, who's from NFU Mutual's Dingwall branch. Johnny, you gave an excellent presentation at the meeting held earlier this year to Clerks of Common Grazings, and there were so many questions and topics I hadn't considered for Crofts and Commons and Sheepstock clubs. I thought it would be great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm not bad, thanks. Thanks for having me along. The Crofting meeting was brilliant. Really enjoyed coming along to it. It was, hopefully I didn't bore you all too long when I got sidetracked on the liability discussions. But yeah, really good. It was really good to catch up with a lot of people that we probably don't see enough of.
Yeah, it was good. And there were just loads of questions that arose as a result of your presentation. And yeah, I think people just don't think about it, do they, until they hear a little bit and then they think of more questions. What would you say are the most common claims in crofting?
I think for crofting clients, just by the nature of where they are, I think the most common thing we will see is probably liability claims. Public liability claims, resulting mostly from walkers walking through. We all like going walking in the hills and going walking out and about, but with livestock and sheep and cattle in these fields, it does make things slightly more interesting, I think would be the easiest word to use there. So we do see a fair amount of claims for people getting injured by cattle, for example.
Okay.
The other ones we see are sort of around maybe theft of livestock, sheep, especially, and then probably after that we'll get claims for sheds getting damaged in storms. I think especially with the majority of our crofting community being on the west coast, the storms do hit, and they do hit hard out there.
Yeah.
I think poor Paige in the office this last week has been inundated with storm claims after Storm Amy. So yeah, I would say that's sort of one of the bigger ones from a non-liability standpoint would be storm claims on buildings.
Okay. Yeah. And how did you get into insurance? What's your background?
I went to the Scottish Agricultural College in Crabeston, and then sort of finished there and went home to work on one of the local farms in Nairn, and was there for 5 or 6 years, basically managing the cattle side of things, a suckler herd of cows. So I was there for 5 or 6 years, then went and helped Ian Wilson and Paul Wilson at their farm at Cairnglass. He's the NFU Scotland regional manager. So I think I was there for 5 years as well. So there's a bit of a theme will come in here. And then after that, I decided to take a bit of a change in pace. And sort of when my son was born, I went to work for the Department of Agriculture.
Okay.
ARPID, whatever name they decided to go by at that point. But yeah, so I was with ARPID for, again, 5 years. And I think that's probably where I first encountered you, Siobhan. So I was doing land inspections, cattle inspections, sort of Crofting County's grant scheme applications and approvals, and then laterally sort of the rural priorities applications when that was on the go. So that was sort of 5 years I think I needed just to kind of get away from the farm and find out a bit about the admin side of the farm there. And then it was just one day my sister, who worked for NFU Mutual's Elgin agency, contacted me and said, "There's a job in Dingwall. I think you should go for it. It's a farm insurance job." And I kind of thought to myself, insurance, I don't know. It's a bit left field. So went through the application process, went through the interviews and everything else. And it came to just before Christmas, well, 10 years ago, actually. And just before Christmas, I got phoned and got offered the job. And then it all became very real, and I thought, oh, maybe I am going to do this. So yeah, so that's how I sort of, I suppose, fell into insurance, and it's a good fit for me, in that I mostly 90% of what I deal with will be farm estates, and including crofts in the farm sort of bracket. So yeah, farms, crofts, estates is sort of most of my time is spent doing them, and I think having that background in agriculture does help.
Aye, yeah,
We can go out and we can chat about cows, we can chat about sheep, we can, moan about the price of whatever we decide to moan about that week. And actually, at the end of it, have a bit of a laugh while we're doing it. So it makes the insurance a bit less onerous. And it actually means we probably get down to the nitty gritty of the insurance easier as well, because we're probably talking about the price of cattle. It leads on to a conversation about whether their cattle are correctly valued for the insurance and things like that. So it
yeah,
just makes it a little bit more of a conversation rather than I suppose, an interrogation, if you like.
yeah, yeah. Like most crofts are quite small businesses and part-time businesses. Do they really need insurance? Like, should that be something that you think about if you've got a croft?
Yes. I think for me, there is almost that temptation to think, oh, I'm just a small crofter. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
any insurance. I've only got a two or three sheep. You know, everything will be fine. That two or three sheep could probably cause more problems than 10 cattle. Um, I think the easiest one and the most obvious one to sort of flag it on is just public liability. If you've got two or three sheep and they somehow manage to get out of the field,
Mm-hmm.
someone leaves the gate open, a walker leaves the gate open by mistake, they do what sheep do and they escape through a fence,
Mm-hmm.
and they end up on a road and they cause an accident. Straight away, that's a public liability claim pretty much all day long. There would be an aspect of proving negligence, but as a livestock owner, especially if they've just gone through the fence, you have a duty of care to make sure that the fences are stock proof. So that's going to be your first big problem, I would say, is any crofter that has livestock has got an almost immediate exposure to public liability via them escaping, or the sort of the more common one, and the slightly the slightly more problematic one of, say, for example, cows hurting hill walkers or people that are walking through your farm. Either way, it's going to cause you an issue with public liability. Um,
Okay.
and I think on top of that, even if you don't have livestock, if you're doing veg boxes, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or I know I said not livestock, but if you've got a few chickens and you're selling eggs at the bottom of the shed, the farm road, the Croft Road end, you've still got a public liability exposure there if someone gets ill, for example. So whether you have got buildings or machinery or livestock, I would say that almost all crofts will have a public liability exposure somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And when you see public liability on insurance, so I've got Croft insurance, and the public liability is for millions.
Yeah.
And I think, wow, it seems like a huge amount of money, but maybe it isn't when it comes to it, when it comes to claims.
No, I mean it's all about sort of discussing risk, and how we perceive the risk when we're going through it. Someone that's, for example, selling veg boxes
Mhm.
may have a lesser risk than if you're running a herd of cattle on a hill on the west coast where, you know, I go out with my dog to walk a Monroe, for example. But when you look at the millions of pounds of cover that's there, it's probably, when you look at sort of a public liability claim, if someone gets injured, for example, you're not just looking at sort of a compensation award for, I suppose, the inconvenience of being injured, if that is the right wording to use. It's more to do if someone's seriously injured and we have to, they can't work again, so we have to replace their lost income. Their house might need reconfigured. They may need to move house because their injuries won't allow them to stay in the property they're in. Their car, for example, if they need adjustments to their car, it's all about sort of living adjustments that's built in there. So it can start totaling up into quite a considerable amount of money very, very quickly.
Okay.
I mean, for example, when I started with NFU Mutual, our standard farm policy cover was 5 million. And there's a number of crofters will have that cover. Ours is 10 million as standard now.
Okay.
So, that's just a reflection of where sort of claims are going, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're talking about livestock there and people walking through fields, etc. So if you don't want people to walk through the fields, you can't say anything. But can you warn them? And what should you say on your warning sign that's not going to get you into trouble, but also makes it clear that, I don't know, there's cows and calves in the field?
I think it is all about mitigating or kind of reducing the risk as far as you can. I think most health and safety advisors would tell you that health and safety is not about removing a risk. It's about mitigating a risk and reducing it as much as you can. With cattle in the field, you're right. You can't stop people walking through that field. You can't stop them walking across that hill. There's nothing you can do there. And by and large, the majority of people probably don't want to stop that. It's been happening for years, and it's just part of the place we live. I think for me and for a lot of others, it would be putting a sign up, for example, that says cows and calves in field on all your entrances, where there's a public walkway, and also I suppose, do you need to have the cows and young calves in that area? If you've got a public walkway going through a field, do you need to have the cows and sort of baby calves in there for that first 2 months? Could they be somewhere else that is sort of less prominent to the public? And then as the calves get older, move them in there. Same with bulls. If you've got bulls and cows, do they need to be in that field? If they do, there's no way, some places we just can't avoid that. But I suppose making it clear on a sign that there is cows and calves, cows, calves and bulls in a field, just so that the public, when they enter that field or hill, they know it. They know what they're walking into, and they don't walk around a corner and are met with 30 cows and 30 baby calves, and the calves probably get very excited, which then gets the cows very excited, and then I think unfortunately we all know what can happen next. And I think, and the flip side of that as well is that's probably protecting the crofter from a claim against them.
Okay.
It won't ever remove that claim because there's still going to be cows and calves in a field with the public right away. We will have to do a lot of investigation into who was negligent, what action had they carried out to mitigate the risk, things like that. Signs are a really easy way of sort of mitigating some risk, but also, I suppose, being fair to everyone that's using the countryside.
I guess most people might not realise that a cow with a calf at foot, a newborn calf, is a danger. Whereas people will think of bulls as being dangerous, but they won't realise that calves are more dangerous.
Most members of the public maybe don't have the connection with is that calf. They're cute and they're lovely, and it is lovely to see them running about the field. But one roar from a calf can cause a lot of problems.
Yeah. And so should signs be more explicit? Like, should you say warning, cows may attack? Or
I don't I don't think so. I mean, I think if you've got a sign up there saying, for example, the traditional one was always danger.
Hmm.
There was danger. I think as soon for me, you should only really use that where you know there's an explicit danger. Um, with cows and calves and things like that, you don't know they're dangerous. Um, they you might have had cows and calves in that field for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, and there has never ever been an incident. So, and then you could have somebody, I don't know, with a dog walking through the field that suddenly spooks them, or a, we've even I've even heard of sort of jets, low flying jets spooking cattle,
Yeah.
and then that causes problems to the people in the field. So I think it would be, it's almost sounds a bit silly, but it's almost unfair on the cattle to say danger, cattle in field. I think we want to warn people there's cattle in the field without saying that the cattle are by default dangerous.
Is there any issue with putting up more humorous signs, such as, I hope you can cross this field in 9 seconds because the bull can do it in 10 seconds? Is that an issue?
I do like that sign, to be fair. I've seen it kicking about a few times. Um, I suppose, in one sense, it does draw your attention to the fact that there is a bull in that field. So I, you're not doing anything massively wrong in having it. You're telling people there's a bull in the field. I think your problem might be if that bull suddenly manages to do it in 9 seconds and you've done it in 9 seconds and you still get caught.
Yeah.
Um, you maybe haven't timed your bull correctly. And in the same sort of way, you don't really want signs that sort of, for example, I mean, the one that used to be sort of all over the place was danger, bull in field. It's almost an admission that you've got a dangerous animal in a field that you're allowing people to access. I think if you were to challenge that to its sort of fullest, you might be in a position where you end up looking at it going, well, if you know that bull's dangerous, why have you put it in a field? Why haven't you kept it in a shed?
Yeah.
And at that point, your liability is kind of, I wouldn't say it's admitted, but it's harder to defend when you are already telling everyone that that bull's dangerous.
Mhm.
And to be fair, most of the time the bulls aren't. If you're putting a bull out on the hill, you're not going to actively go looking for a dangerous bull to put out there.
What about insurance of livestock, cods, machinery, sheds? Should you be, can you insure your sheep, your pet lamb, your bull? What should you insure? Where do you stop?
I think everyone's needs will be different. And I think that's the beauty of having someone like myself coming out to see you. We can sit down and discuss with you what is. I mean, the phrasing that's often banded about the insurance industry is what is important to you, and I kind of don't like that because probably everything's important to you, but it's almost what do you need to protect, and what is, I don't want to say affordable to protect, but there will be a sliding scale of things that you could insure against pretty much absolutely everything if you wanted to, but obviously there would be a cost to that. So it's kind of what in your business is the most important things for you to protect, and that might be your sheds, your machinery, your livestock, your working dog. Um, the poor dog's always kind of last on the list of things that everyone remembers, but if you went out into the hill without him, you'd probably be lost. Um, it could be public liability, it could be employer's liability, which is one that's quite often forgotten for crofters. Employer's liability is really, it's forgotten about because of the default position of I don't have any employees,
Mhm.
and most crofts probably don't. It will be, you know, one person, a partner, and the children that are crofting it potentially. but the sort of the issue arises there where we have, for example, a sole trader, and it could be that their husband slash wife helps them at the weekends, or it's shearing time or calving time, weaning time. When that sort of times of the year where we suddenly realise we need a hand to do things. They help then, and they're at that point, because they're working under the owner of the croft's instruction, they become a deemed employee.
Okay.
And if your partner gets hurt, your husband, wife gets hurt, what do you do? If it goes back to almost the same discussion about the public liability, if you needed the house changed, the car changed, you might need to think about different childcare arrangements for your family. Potentially your employer's liability would have protected that, but it's one of that things that a lot of people forget about because we don't have any employees. It's just the family. That situation will only really work where you've got a sole trader. If the husband and wife are in partnership, the employer's liability is going to give limited cover there, no cover for the partners, but it would cover the kids, for example. If the kids were helping at the weekend, that's the one thing that I think we find more than anything else when we go out to review things. The need for employer's liability.
And when you're insuring livestock, then are you insuring them against theft or them? Because they might especially if they're a Suffolk. No, didn't say that. So they might well just keel over dead.
Yes.
So presumably you can't claim just because your sheep has died.
No, not in most circumstances. So yeah, by and large, for livestock, you're insuring them against things like fire. If they were in a shed at lambing time, for example, and the shed caught fire and you lost all your sheep. Storm is less likely to be a problem because sheep are probably out, 10 months a year. They might come into the shed for 2 months. But equally, if you had that high value flock of Suffolks, you might think the risk when they're lambing in January in the shed, it might be worth covering them for that. Theft is the obvious one. You then have things like impact, for example. Somebody drives over the sheep. It could be yourself by accident when you're feeding them. It could be them getting out of the fence, escaping onto the road, that kind of things. They would be covered by impact. The bigger one, and the one that sort of, the last couple of years, a lot of people have discussed is worrying. So insuring them against worrying.
Okay.
So that's probably one of the biggest perils we'll see for sheep is sheep worrying cover. And then lastly, sort of straying cover. That would be sort of where you maybe have sheep in a field and, they're in a secure field, you've left them there. They might escape and go somewhere they're not supposed to be. They might escape into the shed and fill their bellies of barley and die.
Mm-hmm.
You're right in that you wouldn't typically insure sheep for just dropping dead with illness. I think that comes back to insure a whole flock of sheep for that would be massively cost prohibitive. But you can do it for taps. For example, you'll see quite a lot around sort of this time of year, people buying taps where they will insure them for, loss of fertility, illness, injury, that you typically wouldn't see covered by a peril. So, injury, for example, might be, they're walking across the field and they trip in a rabbit hole and break their leg.
Yeah.
Typically, that's not covered by a peril, but if they were insured as an individual animal, that would potentially pick it up. You'll see a lot of taps in the sale ring covered by what's called luck penny insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their 3-month sort of cover. You get them home, make sure they're okay. If they get ill, drop dead, unfortunately, that's the sort of cover that would pick them up. But typically, unless you're dealing in high value individual animals, we see less sheep covered that way.
And going back to employers liability. You said if you were in a partnership, then you wouldn't be covered. And if you're a sole trader, you yourself as a sole trader is not covered because you're not employed, presumably.
Yeah.
So how do you cover yourself?
Yeah, that is probably where you need to start looking along the lines of your typical ones would be sort of you're looking at life insurance, for example, um, critical illness cover, that kind of insurance is where, I think a lot of people will have these types of things. Certainly I do for my house.
With employers' liability, then, what if you've got a contractor working in you? So, say you've got a fencer working. Are you if they're coming to you as a contractor? Are they an employee, or do they have their own cover, or should you always be covered in case something happens to them?
Your difference there will be whether they're what is probably classed as a labour-only subcontractor, or I suppose it might be a bona fide subcontractor. Someone is providing you with a service. So the two examples will probably be your fencer that is coming in to do a load of fencing on the hill or the croft. They're taking all their own equipment, all the fence posts, all the wire, all the stuff they need to do the job, and that you have contracted them to do that job, and agreed to price, and you're just going to leave them to do it. They should be carrying their own public liability insurance, and they should be carrying their own employer's liability insurance for any employees they have. The flip side of that might be where you have got a labour only subcontractor, which might be somebody coming in to give you a hand with weaning, shearing, gathering, that kind of activities where it's just a man or a woman that's coming in to help you with that job for the day or a couple of days, and they're going to be working under your instruction. So you're going to tell them to, I don't know, take the dog and go up the right hand side of the hill and gather the sheep from that side. Or you might say to her, I need you to push the calves up and I'll dehorn them. So they're working under your instruction. So at that point, that's where the employer's liability is going to potentially kick back in to say, well, they're working under your instruction. They're not providing any real contracted materials. Your employer's liability should pick them up. And sort of flipping back to the last bit about having really good neighbours, that is the bit where, certainly I've seen employers' liabilities arise from people that were pushing cattle up into a crash for PDing, for example, and they get crashed, and they're not there for any money. They're not there for any other reason than if you help me, I'll help you, and it's the way we all work. Even at home, we'll go and help next door do things, and they'll help us do things, and it's just the way it works. So yeah, that's where the sort of trip can come for employers' liability, where you have people just helping each other out.
So so the other examples are things like common grazings, where people might be doing something communally. They're just all agreeing. So say you were doing a gather and you were going to tip sheep. Everyone's agreeing to do it, but they're not really employed by anyone. How does that work?
That's where we'll get into the realms of messy, potentially legal arguments over who was responsible, who was doing what for whom. I think in a lot of this, and especially with sheep stock clubs as well, a lot of it will come back to how the constitution is drawn up. Is there an agreement within the sort of common grazing as to what happens? The vast majority of the time, it's going to be 10 people who own the sheep that are going up to gather their own sheep. So if someone gets hurt, in theory, are they working for themselves or are they working for somebody else because they're still gathering their own sheep at that point, as they just so happen to be gathering Siobhan's sheep at the same time? It gets into the realms of we would need them to prove that the person they're trying to take an action against was negligent. Because with all liability claims, it falls on, there needs to be negligence in there somewhere. So, if you, for example, are part of a common grazing and you're gathering sheep on the hill and you've done it for 20 years, and just so happens that this one time you've slipped and fallen and broken your leg, is there a claim in there? It would be a hard one to prove, I would argue.
So a sheep stock club would be simpler, because a sheep stock club's more likely to be employing somebody, because they'll be agreeing, right, you go gather, and that's more of a contract situation. Whereas a common grazing is going to be everyone's just getting together and doing it, whereas a sheep stock club is going to be more of a direct ask. So I presume with a sheep stock club you would need employer's liability.
Yeah, I think for me that the sheep stock club is a far easier discussion to have. Just by the definition of the makeup of it, you are going to be needing employer's liability in most circumstances. You are likely to need public liability in most circumstances because the sheep stock club probably own the sheep. So by sort of default at that point, if the sheep cause an accident, the sheep stock club are going to need to cover rather than the individual crofters that might be involved in the sheep stock club. So I think that's an important bit for sheep stock clubs, is that yes, your individual crofters might all have insurance for their own activities, but if they're also members of the sheep stock club, that sheep stock club really should have cover in there for public liability, employer's liability. You could argue even legal expenses in there, because they would be a separate entity. And then if the sheep stock club have equipment, they might have their own sheep handling equipment, and things like that they need to insure. So the sheep stock club is it's an easier thing to determine in terms of liability and sort of material things that they would need to cover.
What about woodlands? If you'd planted something up and you were under a scheme, presumably you need to insure that.
Yeah, so woodlands is an interesting one at the moment.
Okay.
So I think we all, certainly up our part of the world, we all know of many fires in the last sort of 5 or 6 months that have kind of wiped out and decimated a lot of new planting up here. The woodland schemes, you have a duty to insure them. That's in your grant application. You have to insure these for, off the top of my head, I think it's the first 15 years. It might be 10 years. You would need to check that. But if you've got a duty to replant them, the common grazing have an insurable interest there to ensure that there is money effectively there to replant these schemes, and do the fencing. So crofting, common grazings with trees, yeah, 100% I would be getting in touch with your insurer or an insurer to discuss that, because fire cover on trees is a massive issue at the moment. That we are seeing more and more wildfires kicking about. So that, and also I suppose just the public liability that goes with them. Maybe not the first 5-10 years. Your sapling potentially isn't going to do a huge amount of damage to somebody that's out walking. But as that trees get older, as they kind of mature, as they grow in funny directions, you've got branches there that are a bit weaker, roots are maybe not formed as well, trees falling onto property, cars, things like that. So yeah, if you've got a common grazing with woodlands, I'd be encouraging people to discuss that with the insurer to see if they can get cover for what they need to protect the replanting, really. If it was a commercial woodland, you might be looking at things like business interruption for loss of income, but by and large, for a lot of your common grazing plantations, it's native woodland creation. So it would be the replanting costs I would be looking to protect there.
Okay. Anything else that people need to think about then, Johnny, for crofts, common grazings or sheep stock clubs? Is anything we've not covered?
I don't think so. I think for me, I think it's just about having that conversation with your insurer to what see what you need. Have the discussion, have the chat to say, well, I'm doing X, Y, Z, and just throw it all out on the table. And have that sort of very sort of frank and honest chat about what could happen. And what would you do if I always I like that. What would you do if I took your shed away tomorrow and you didn't have a shed? What, your livestock. I kind of will quite often say to folk, I'm coming with my lorry tomorrow and I'm going to give you, £20,000 for all your livestock. Are you happy? And it's that sort of having that discussion with people to say, well, if you're not happy, or if you can't carry on, or if it's going to cause you a massive inconvenience to your business, you need to speak to us and we need to try and see if we can protect that for you. I think the only thing I would say is for sheep stock clubs, especially, because they're likely to have, just by their makeup, more than 5 people involved in the business, health and safety is going to be one of the things that potentially could trip them up in terms of, legally, if you've got 5 or more employees, you have to have a written health and safety plan. It's at the back of everyone's mind. It kind of suddenly appears when there's an incident and somebody goes, where's the health and safety plan? I don't know. And it's that sort of, if you are a croft business, some of them will be contracting. I know myself, I've got some crofters that are, quite substantial businesses and have got 5, 6, 7, 8 employees. You need to have your health and safety in check because it's a really easy one to trip up on, but it's a really easy one to do something about. And it doesn't need to be massively onerous. That would be the one thing I would say. The health and safety aspect is the one thing I spend a lot of time speaking to folk about. And it also helps with your insurance. If we can see that you're on top of your health and safety, you're taking all the kind of practical measures you can to mitigate risk, why wouldn't that have a positive impact on your insurance?
Excellent. I think that's a good note to end on, Johnny. Thank you very much for that clear explanation of what folk might need to consider, because it's something that, you probably have at the back of your mind, but you maybe don't think about because you don't think you're a big business, so you don't think you need these things. So, thank you very much. That was really useful.
No problem at all. It was brilliant to be invited. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and if you've any crofting matter you'd like covered, please do get in touch. The Farm Advisory Service has many other podcasts that are worth subscribing to if you're a crofter or farming in the Highlands, such as Stock Talk, Agribusiness News and Thrill of the Hill. Thanks to Ashley Foster for production, Kieran Sim for editing, and Kirsten Blackwood and Kerry Hammond as executive producers.
The Farm Advisory Service podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business, and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.